It's Tuesday in Los Angeles. The thermometer is pushing 98 degrees, and nothing is working the way it should. Air conditioners are sputtering, tempers are flaring, and the smog is so thick you can almost taste it. That's the moment when Joel Schumacher's Falling Down begins. And in many ways, it's the moment when America was teetering on the edge of something darker and more unpredictable. Looking back, the film didn't just capture the mood of its time, it seemed to forecast where things were going. In the early 1990s, the cultural atmosphere in the United States was thick with anxiety and disillusionment. The Cold War had finally wound down, but instead of relief, there was a lingering sense of drift. The economy had stumbled into a recession, jobs were vanishing as globalization and automation gained steam, and middle-class families were starting to feel the weight of that shift. In cities like LA, the tension was more than just economic. It was racial, social, and structural. Neighborhoods were fraying. Civility felt optional. It was a city on the verge of boiling over, and in some parts, it already had. So when Falling Down hit theaters in February 1993, it landed hard. This wasn't a cartoonish action flick with quippy one-liners and giant explosions. There were no wisecracking cops or over-the-top villains. This was something grittier, sadder, more grounded in the reality that many Americans were trying not to think about. The story follows William Foster, a man who looks like a relic from the past. Flat-top haircut, button-down shirt, plastic-rimmed glasses, and a cold stare that suggests he's been barely holding it together for a while. Played by Michael Douglas, Foster is a recently laid-off defense industry worker who abandons his car in the middle of a traffic jam and sets off on foot across Los Angeles. What begins as a walk quickly spirals into something much darker. He becomes a self-appointed enforcer of what he thinks the world should be, confronting people, systems, and symbols that he believes have failed him. Every stop on his journey is another fuse burning toward a final explosion. But the implosion that drives the film isn't limited to the narrative. It was mirrored by the production itself. The year was 1992, and Los Angeles was a city in flames. Following the acquittal of 4 LAPD officers and the brutal beating of Rodney King, riots tore through the city. Parts of Los Angeles were literally burning as Schumacher and his crew tried to film scenes for the movie. Production was happening in neighborhoods like Linwood, Koreatown, and Pasadena, areas that were deeply affected by the unrest. For several days, filming had to be shut down entirely. The riots weren't just a backdrop to the story, they were bleeding into it. Some crew members recalled navigating barricades and smoke just to reach shooting locations. At times, it was difficult to tell whether they were working on a movie or caught in a documentary about a city coming undone. Screenwriter Ebba Rose Smith had always intended for Falling Down to be about a man who couldn't adapt. William Foster wasn't just angry. He was obsolete. He had built a life according to the supposed rules of the American dream. Steady job, patriotism, family, discipline. And then one day he was told none of it mattered. He was dismissed. Figuratively and literally. That disconnect, the feeling of betrayal by a society he had played by the rules to serve, is the fuel that drives his journey. In Smith's hands, the story was part social satire, part psychological drama, and part bitter comedy. But under Schumacher's direction, the edges became sharper. The violence was raw. The humor had a mean streak. The film never lets Foster become a hero. It just lets you sit with him long enough to understand how someone could go from frustrated citizen to armed maniac in the span of a few hot, miserable hours. Visually, the film commits fully to this sense of decay. Nothing in Falling Down looks clean or orderly. The streets are littered, the colors are washed out by heat and grime, and the sky feels perpetually low and oppressive. According to production designer Barbara Ling, the route Foster takes through Los Angeles was no accident. The geography was carefully charted so that his path felt like a descent, not just through different neighborhoods, but into deeper levels of instability and detachment. What starts in gridlocked commuter hell moves through forgotten streets, seedy shops, gang territory, and finally ends at the edge of the sea. You can feel the pressure rising with each step, each encounter, each cracked sidewalk and peeling billboard. The visuals make it clear. This isn't just about one man cracking. It's about a world that's already broken. And what happens when someone decides they're not going to follow the script anymore? Michael Douglas, who at the time was riding a wave of critical and commercial success thanks to powerhouse roles in films like Wall Street and Fatal Attraction, described Falling Down as his most dangerous role. He wasn't exaggerating. This wasn't another sleek antihero or suave businessman. This was something rawer, riskier. His character, William Foster, better known by his personalized license plate, D-FENS, is a man teetering on the edge of complete psychological collapse. He walks a jagged line between being momentarily sympathetic and deeply unnerving. At first glance, his frustrations feel familiar, almost uncomfortably relatable. Overpriced convenience store sodas, the rigid tyranny of fast food breakfast hours, bureaucratic stonewalling, and the general grind of city life. For a moment, you're tempted to nod along, to recognize yourself in his grumbles. But then, suddenly and without warning, he pulls out a Tech-9 submachine gun, and all empathy curdles. The film makes no effort to flatter the audience. Douglas's Foster is equal parts pathetic and terrifying, simultaneously a product of his environment and a symptom of something much darker festering beneath the surface. Balancing this storm of volatility is Robert Duvall as Sergeant Martin Prendergast. A performance that is as understated as Douglas's is explosive. Prendergast is a man facing his own kind of personal collapse, mocked by younger colleagues, confined by a deeply anxious and domineering wife, and pressured into an early retirement he doesn't really want. He seems small and cautious on the surface, but Duvall imbues him with a quiet strength that becomes more apparent with every scene. While Foster breaks under the weight of his disillusionment, Prendergast bends, adapts, and ultimately rises to the challenge. He is the film's moral compass, its counterweight, and in many ways, its real protagonist. His journey is not one of unraveling, but of awakening. The final confrontation only works because Duvall brings so much emotional gravity to a character who might otherwise have been overlooked. Surrounding these two men are a supporting cast of characters who each reflect or refract some facet of Foster's descent. Barbara Hershey plays Beth, Foster's estranged ex-wife. Her fear is palpable, and it adds necessary emotional weight to the narrative. She isn't just someone Foster wants to see. She's someone who had to get away from him, someone who knows what he's capable of even if the audience doesn't. Yet, Rachel Ticotin plays Detective Sandra Torres, Prendergast's perceptive and no-nonsense partner. While she's frequently sidelined or dismissed by their male colleagues, she brings an essential voice of reason and concern, spotting patterns others ignore. Then there's Frederick Forrest as the film's most overtly despicable figure, a sneering, homophobic, neo-Nazi surplus store owner. His encounter with Foster is a pivotal moment. Initially, the two men seem disturbingly aligned, but Foster, despite all his faults, bristles at the man's unapologetic bigotry. It's one of the only moments where Foster shows something resembling moral discernment, but even that comes too late to redeem him. The plot of Falling Down unfolds over a single sweltering day in Los Angeles, and that tight time frame adds to the film's relentless sense of pressure. It begins simply enough. William Foster, stuck in traffic on a blisteringly hot morning, abandons his car without explanation and sets off on foot across the city. His stated mission is simple. He wants to attend his daughter's birthday party. But nothing in Falling Down is ever just that simple. What starts as a man irritated by everyday inconveniences, high prices at a corner store, rudeness at a burger joint, quickly spirals into a series of increasingly violent encounters. He arms himself with a baseball bat, then an Uzi, and eventually a bag full of weapons and a shoulder-mounted rocket launcher. Every new scene escalates his behavior. Each interaction pushes him further from society and deeper into a self-justifying delusion that he is simply fighting back against a world that no longer makes sense to him. But as the violence escalates, the truth about Foster emerges in fragments. He isn't a man who suddenly snapped. He's someone who has likely been simmering for years. He's not merely frustrated. He's angry, bitter, abusive, and potentially homicidal. His ex-wife's fear isn't irrational. It's survival instinct. Flashbacks and details dropped throughout the day paint a picture of a man who has always been controlling, always prone to rage, always one step away from this kind of breakdown. By the time he reaches the Venice Pier where his family has fled, the illusion of him as a misunderstood everyman has crumbled completely. His daughter, young and innocent, still greets him with joy. His ex-wife is frozen with fear, and Foster himself, haunted, confused, perhaps realizing the inevitability of his actions, doesn't seem to know what he came to do. The climax is not a shootout, not an explosion, but a conversation. Prendergast confronts him on the pier, calm but firm. He gives Foster a chance to surrender, to end the day without more bloodshed. But Foster, grasping at whatever dignity he thinks he has left, pulls a water pistol from his waistband, forcing Prendergast to shoot him. It's not a triumphant moment. It's quiet, slow, and sad. Foster falls from the pier into the sea, less like a man going out in a blaze of glory, more like a broken statue toppling into the void. His final line, uttered with stunned disbelief, is a question that lingers in the air long after the credits roll. "I'm the bad guy?" When Falling Down arrived in theaters in early 1993, it didn't just land, it detonated. It debuted at #1 at the U.S. box office, pushing aside Groundhog Day, which had been comfortably holding the top spot. This wasn't a quiet or modest release. The buzz was immediate and the conversations were loud. On a relatively modest production budget of $25 million, the film went on to gross $96 million worldwide. A commercial success by any standard, especially for a dark, unsettling character study masquerading as a mainstream action thriller. Audiences were intrigued, if not always comfortable. Critics, however, didn't know exactly what to make of it. Some praised the film's complexity and moral ambiguity, while others were disturbed by its potential to be misread or, worse, embraced for all the wrong reasons. Roger Ebert, always keen to identify the emotional undercurrents of a film, praised Falling Down for its atmosphere of sadness and psychological decay. He saw in Michael Douglas's performance a portrait of a man adrift in a world that no longer seemed to have a place for him. To Ebert, Douglas wasn't playing a villain or a hero, but rather a tragic figure, a man whose descent into chaos was marked not by triumph, but by confusion and sorrow. The performance, he noted, was less about rage and more about a kind of hollow resignation, someone who has finally accepted his own irrelevance and is lashing out in desperation. Others were less generous. Kenneth Turan of the Los Angeles Times was especially wary of the way the film seemed to offer catharsis through violence. He warned that the film's tone wavered too often between condemnation and indulgence, and that its revenge fantasy trappings could too easily be taken at face value. To Turan, Falling Down risked giving audiences exactly what they wanted: glorified vengeance dressed up as commentary, without taking full responsibility for how that might be received. It was, in his eyes, a shallow gesture toward deeper issues that left more questions than answers. Vincent Canby of the New York Times offered a more interpretive view. For him, the film operated like a cinematic Rorschach test. It wasn't a message movie in the traditional sense. It was a mirror held up to viewers, revealing more about their worldview than about the film's. Depending on your politics, your background, or your temperament, you could walk away with a completely different reading. That kind of ambiguity, while potentially powerful, also made the film deeply polarizing. Outside the realm of professional critics, reactions were even more divided. Several Korean-American advocacy groups strongly objected to the portrayal of the Korean grocer, viewing the character as a harmful stereotype and emblematic of a larger pattern of cinematic insensitivity. The film, which was already controversial for its subject matter, hit a nerve in a city still recovering from the 1992 Los Angeles riots. In response to mounting protests, Warner Brothers made the decision to cancel the film's release in South Korea entirely. There was also unease among workers in the defense industry, who bristled at being depicted, by association, as obsolete and emotionally unstable. What some saw as a poignant exploration of economic dislocation, others viewed as a crude caricature of a disgruntled white man lashing out at the world. And yet, decades later, Falling Down has only grown more culturally resonant, not less. Over 30 years after its release, the film continues to spark debate. It refuses to die quietly. Instead, it's been reinterpreted, re-examined, and in some corners of the internet, outright rebranded. The character of William Foster, D-FENS, is now a meme, a shorthand for the exhausted man who just wanted breakfast after 11:30 a.m. at a fast food joint. On social media, that image gets reposted as a joke. But the film itself isn't joking. The deeper story behind the meme is anything but funny. It's a story of psychological erosion, of systems breaking down, of people clinging to outdated ideas of their own worth and role in society. It's about what happens when someone decides that they deserve to be heard, even if that means bringing the whole place down with them. Falling Down now lives alongside films like Taxi Driver, Fight Club, and American Psycho, all movies that explore the fragile male psyche under societal strain. They are films that walk the tightrope between critique and glamorization, often attracting audiences who misinterpret their anti-heroes as aspirational figures rather than cautionary tales. Like those other films, Falling Down has become a litmus test of sorts. It asks viewers to check their empathy, their anger, and their moral compass. And not everyone likes what they find. Despite being wrapped in the stylings of a thriller, the film was always doing something deeper and far more dangerous. It lured viewers in with guns, outbursts, and one-liners, but beneath that surface was a character study that pulled no punches. Foster is not simply a working-class guy who snaps. He's a man with a history of violence and control, whose so-called breakdown is actually a long-delayed exposure of who he really is. The film challenges us by placing us inside his head for most of its runtime, then forcing us to reckon with how long we sympathized with him before we realized the truth. That discomfort is precisely the point. It's why the film still holds power. Falling Down is rarely a feel-good experience. It doesn't offer neat conclusions or satisfying moral victories. It gives you a man in free fall and asks what, if anything, could have stopped him. It doesn't pretend the world is fair or that people behave rationally. It just shows you what happens when someone decides they won't follow the rules anymore because they think the world broke its promise to them first. This is why Falling Down is still widely misunderstood. It's not a power fantasy or a call to arms. It's a study in erosion, of self, of civility, of myth. It presents a man who believes he's the hero of his own story, then gradually reveals how much damage that belief can do, both to himself and everyone around him. And by the time he asks the question, "I'm the bad guy?" the answer is already obvious, even if he doesn't see it. In the end, Falling Down is one of the rare films that manages to entertain while holding a mirror up to the viewer's own frustration, entitlement, or sympathy. It doesn't just provoke thought, it provokes discomfort, and maybe that's why it still matters. It doesn't want you to cheer. It wants you to ask yourself why you ever considered it. So if you think William Foster is the hero of the story, it might be time to watch it again, with both eyes open.
Joy will bring. Tune into the beat, feel the magic, it's true. Channel 199X, we're here just for you.